On this episode of Driven by Dreams, we're joined by Brad Hunter, the president of Emerge Labs. Brad thrives on uncovering niches, identifying needs, and turning them into successful businesses. As a tech expert and consultant, he's helped million-dollar companies save costs and implement game-changing tech solutions. Get ready to learn how he turns ideas into impact. Hi, Brad. It's wonderful to have you here. I'm looking forward to learning more about your story.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Lovely to be here.
So, could you share a bit about yourself?
Sure. Let's see here. I grew up in Michigan. It's like small town in Michigan, and came from a family of entrepreneurs. When I was a small child, my father had started a business. So as I was growing up, from the time I was five on, it was always involved in that general entrepreneurial life. My parents had a growing business. Um, sometimes doing great, sometimes not doing great, and so kind of always lived in that whole thing. Went to college, moved out to California, to San Diego. Uh, got what was kind of a random job at the time. I had a college degree, but the job that I ended up getting initially had nothing to do with a college degree, just a random sales job. That ended up going very well. And yeah, then ever since then have always just had multiple business myself and kind of always enjoyed the entrepreneurial journey.
Nice. So, when did you first decide that you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Was it after seeing your parents' business?
Yeah, I think just growing up around that, yeah, it just seemed like, yeah, having any sort of a true traditional job just didn't even really seem like something of interest at all. It was because it felt like you're always involved in, I don't know, just in the decision making process, really part of something, really building something and growing up in that environment to just take a normal 9 to 5 job and do your little piece and not really, feel like you have part in ownership just didn't even seem like something that would ever interest me.
So, what were some of the biggest obstacles you faced when scaling your business, and how did you address them?
Let's see, biggest obstacles when scaling. Uh, so I also do consulting. So as far as my own business and clients' businesses and everything. So I guess I would say, could answer that from, I feel like, a few different perspectives. When it comes to scaling, I mean, a couple things, obviously just sales and revenue, right? How are you bringing in new clients? Do you have a good, efficient way to generate new revenue? Do you just have a system that is bringing in leads and generating revenue? And so it's step one is tweaking that process to making sure that process. But usually if you're talking about like scaling and growing, it's the point where you've got that figured out. You've got people coming in pretty well. And then so when you really talk about scaling, then it kind of shifts into the operational side of things. Can you really do things efficiently once you really start growing and scaling? And yeah, once again, I feel like that question, it depends on so many variables, right? Like, one company, we went from scaling from having, one retail location to we grew into 500. And so when you're talking about scaling, even then it was like that term varied from year to year, right? Like our initial thing was like, oh my gosh, we're going to open up 5 new locations. That's such a big deal. How are we going to do it? How are we going to put that together? And you kind of start doing it. You create a plan. And then it was then the next year, we're going to open up 50. And the next year, we're going to open up 300. And, and a lot of that just has to do with the idea of having the plan in place, having the operational plan in place, and then also looking ahead towards, to me, the simplest way is, okay, let's say you have one location now and you want to get 50. How do you do that? Well, it's start by looking at what does a business look like with 50 locations? What does that require from a management perspective with 50 locations? What does that require from a staffing perspective? And a lot of times, I think the easiest way to look at it is reverse engineering, right? Like our business right now looks this way. We don't even have all these levels and layers and things. But if we're going to get to this, if we're going to get to this size, it's going to require all these different levels, all these different layers of management. And so how is that going to work? And so kind of looking at where do you want to get to? What does it look like when you're going to get there? And, reverse engineering from where you're at today is how I usually go about it.
Okay. So, how were the initial days when you started your business?
Mm, uh, I would say I love being an entrepreneur. I hate the initial days. The initial days we have to juggle everything. Where we're just whatever random goofy task that never seems like it's going to be that big of a deal to accomplish, and you put it on your calendar that okay, I'm going to do that tomorrow. That'll take me like 2 hours, and then you're 10 hours into the day and you still haven't even got the random, you know, thing done that you thought was going to be so quick and easy to do. That's the part that I dislike. I don't know, like and dislike. I like the idea of the new business, the exciting new thing, whatever it is, I can figure it out. It's going to work. It's going to be magical. But where I really enjoy it is when you have it built up to where you have a good support staff in place. And when you then come up with ideas and different things to do, you have the staff in place to execute for you. To me, that's the stage of the business that I really, really enjoy is the idea, where I live, I'm able to live in the idea phase of it and don't have to get in the dirty work of all the execution. You have a good team that you can come to them and say, hey, we're going to pivot. We want to do this, make it happen. Here's the steps, do this, that, and let's talk again in a couple days. So that's the part of it that I like. Yeah, the very early stages of it, can just be, it just feels like you can work your tail off for months on end and barely get anywhere. And then all of a sudden, something happens where you start to get enough of those pieces in place and then some real momentum starts occurring. You get more efficient at doing those little things. So what you put on your calendar for 2 hours, you're really able to accomplish in 2 hours. And you really start building some momentum and things get going. But in the very beginning, yeah, I feel like my experience has been it takes 3 times longer than you think it's going to take to accomplish anything.
Well, as an entrepreneur, you also have to make a lot of tough decisions. So, how do you handle that decision making?
So let's see. If we're talking decision making for personnel situations, um, I've always approached those in the way where, especially if it comes to having to let somebody go, right? Is I usually approach that in the way of if it's a situation where I'm not happy with them, it's a good chance that they're also not happy with me, right? It's a good chance that just that particular situation wasn't right for both parties. And so the idea of, letting somebody go, having to terminate somebody, for the most case for me, isn't such a hard, situation, because I do think in most situations, it's like, well, you don't actually even like this. This isn't your job. I mean, I know this is the job you're currently working at, but like, this isn't where you should be. You're not doing a good job. You're not enjoying the work. So, yeah, so that part of things don't really bother me as much as it bothers other people. I think that other people, just the concept of having, especially when you first become an entrepreneur and are hiring people to let somebody go, and it can be a really challenging thing that a lot of people just try to avoid. But that part of it doesn't bother me too much. The parts that are hardest for me, I guess I would say, is there's certain areas that I'm just not totally familiar with in business. And so it's in those areas where you just don't know. So an example in my world is like digital advertising. I don't know a whole lot about it, right? But especially these days, like every business requires some sort of digital advertising. And it's situations like that where it's like, I simply just don't really know the space that well to feel confident that I'm making the right decision. And so then it just feels like, well, I don't know, but I have to pick something. I guess I'll pick choice A. and then you're kind of, it's going, is it working, is it not working, and then you have this like time frame of like, well, I guess I just got to let it play out for a while and let it play out for a while, but I don't have the confidence of, did I make the right decision at all? And then comes a little couple months down the road, it can be evident that like, no, I need to change directions because that decision had just simply was the wrong decision. And I need to just cut loose and start over. And that's a really hard, a hard thing to do, because then you just feel like you waste all that time, you waste all that money, and you got nowhere.
So what do you do when you don't know about the decision you're making and you're faced with that doubt? How do you just be like, okay, I have to make a decision now?
Um, I'm very big on the idea of just, you have to make decisions and move forward, and you're gonna make wrong decisions no matter what. And so I just don't put a lot of time and weight into that. I put it more in like, you got to keep pace. To me, the most important thing is just keeping pace. You have to just keep actions moving forward, and you have to. Before, I talked about the idea of reverse engineering, right? Like, I'm here, in 1 year I want to be here, and what are the incremental steps that need to occur, and I just have to keep taking those steps, right, wrong, or whatever. I have to make decisions within an X certain amount of time I give myself, right? Within the next 2 weeks, I have to decide on this portion of the business, and one way or another, I have to make the decision. Don't really leave it as an option of, giving myself more time to think about it or talk to more people. It's just like, no, you have to make a decision. Time is up, make it, move on, because you got about 1,000 of them anyway. You're going to get some wrong.
So your current business, Emerge Labs, is about software and automation, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Software automation and consulting.
So you didn't have a background in programming. What
Correct.
inspired you to start a business in the software development field?
Very much so stumbled into it. One of those things where you just saw the need. What we were doing in the field at the time was the process itself of commission reconciliation is where it all started for us. I had a company, well, it's technically the same company, Emerge Labs. When it first started, we offered different consulting services for wireless retailers. And we offered kind of everything under the sun, because previously we were a really large retailer. And so we offered all sorts of different services there. And one of many services that we offered was this idea of commission reconciliation. And so then what happened is, after about a year or so, it seemed like, okay, that commission reconciliation, that's where a lot of our revenue is coming from. That's where it seems like the marketplace really has a need and is really willing to pay for that service. So let's focus in on that, and let's maybe, kind of let these other things we're doing just fall to the wayside. And then in doing that, at the time, the way that worked was you would train people to take all these different spreadsheets and do all these different formulas to compare, the data and figure out where is there a discrepancy, right? So like, Verizon paid me for this phone. They said that I sold an iPhone on an upgrade, but really I sold a Samsung on a renewal, and those things have different commissions tied to them. And so that's the kind of what it was all about, right? Is figuring out what are the discrepancies between what the carrier said and what your records show, and figuring out what those discrepancies are. And so the way it was done at the time was all very manual, just teaching people how to use Excel efficiently. And it was just one of those things that dawned on me of like, I don't know anything about software, but I have 20 people that all they do all day long is sort through this data on Excel. That just seems like something software should be doing. And so it was very much so just, having that, I don't know if it's that much of an instinct. It got to the point where it was very obvious, right? It was very obvious that this is crazy. I can't continue to hire an endless amount of people and be training them to do this mundane task that must be something software can accomplish. I need to figure out how to get software to accomplish that. And that's really what it was. And then it was just simply getting on Google and, having different meetings and showing software developers, walking through the process. Like, this is exactly what we're doing right now. can you automate? Can you build software that will automate that? And then them coming back and saying, well, yeah, we can do it. This is how much it's going to cost. This is how long it's going to take. And then it was, all right, go do it.
So, why is software becoming increasingly important for companies in the modern day world?
Labor costs. Um, software is able to reduce your labor costs, and labor gets more and more expensive, and so software just finds, that's kind of like what we do is we work with companies to just help find all those little niches. We work with typically companies that have at least 100 employees, usually several thousand, and they have some existing back-end systems, right? But a lot of times it's they have some sort of a niche type situation going on where they're paying for this SaaS platform to perform X, Y, and Z. And it does the job pretty well, but it doesn't do it perfect for their exact situation. And then it gets to a point where they're paying quite a bit because they're a pretty good sized company, so they have quite a few users. So then we can come in and look at that and just say, hey, you're spending $5,000 a month on this platform that helps your business do X, Y, and Z. Well, we can build you a custom platform that'll do it better. That'll do it exactly the way you want it to be done. And it can also interact with this other system and this other department that right now, that whole process is totally manual. And, it's costing you so much money to do that. And so, that's really the biggest thing. From our perspective, we focus on the business side. It just is able to make things more efficient.
So, how has your range of experiences influenced your approach to business?
Yeah, it's been great. I've been fortunate to work in a lot of different industries and learn. I've spent a lot of time in agriculture. I've spent a lot of time in wireless. I've spent a lot of time in mortgage banking. Um, right now I'm actually kind of doing a dive working in the digital advertising space, doing some consulting there. And it's like you take a little piece from everything, right? And I feel like the broader your range of experience, just kind of the more little nuggets you have to pull from, because it's like the way that the mortgage industry operates and the thing that really makes them profitable and how that business really works well, the magic from there, you can kind of take a piece of that and you can apply that same concept to a different industry that doesn't operate in that way, that doesn't understand those philosophies and those principles, but it's like you can kind of take little pieces from each thing. And I think it helps you kind of have a leg up on the competition, right? Because you have a different perspective that they don't.
So, I know each industry is different, but if you would have to say, what was one of the most valuable experiences you had?
Yeah, I'd say the most valuable one would have had to be my first job out of college. Started as a sales rep at a little cart in a mall selling phones, and then we grew that to we ended up with 3,000 employees, and we had 500 locations across the country. And that was, I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, and as were everybody we hired was in that same situation. So you literally just had that situation where nobody knew anything, right? I mean, like everything we were doing was your best guess, if you will, right? Um, and just that thing of going through and creating that company, and what's a company? It's like the idea of when the company's 50 employees, it kind of works in one way. When it's 250 employees, just the way the company operates shifts into a totally different thing, right? When it becomes 1,500 employees, and it becomes 3,000 employees, it's just the way that all the parts and pieces interact and happen is so much different. I think that was really valuable to just to see that shift, just to be in the same space in the same industry, and over time to see how that exact same space and same industry operates so much differently at 150 employees compared to 1,000 employees, compared to 3,000 employees is so much different. and that's probably the most valuable lesson that I've learned.
Okay, so could you share a book, podcast, or resource that has significantly influenced your career?
Yeah, I'd say right now one of my favorites is Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. That's one of my recent favorites. I think that book does one of the best jobs I've ever seen at not only giving you a good like business philosophy, but walking you through exact steps on how to implement that philosophy. And it's, if it's from the concept of being a business owner, how do you make sure you're getting the most out of your time, right? How do you make sure you're not just working yourself to death, but not really accomplishing much? So that one, and then I'd say my other, like probably my favorite one of all time uh, would be the 4 Hour Work Week. Tim Ferriss with 4 Hour Work Week. So that book is probably 15 years old or something. And Tim Ferriss is a pretty famous podcast these days. But yeah, that was a very interesting book, called the 4 Hour Work Week, which obviously, is a very interesting concept in general. But same thing, kind of just gave a different approach on how to, you know, start a business and run your life, as opposed to like, oh, you need to work yourself. You got to outwork everybody and work 80 hours a week. And that's how you succeed. He had kind of a very inverse philosophy that was interesting, right? His philosophy is like, no, you can start these businesses where you only work 4 hours a week. And, um, yeah. And how you kind of go about doing it, which a lot of it in his thing, a lot of it had to do with the idea of, living inexpensively. First of all, that was kind of one of his, and so he was big on like being an expat, traveling around the world, different parts of the world where you could live for a very reasonable cost and have a really good quality of life, and then generate these businesses that can generate decent income, enough to where you're enjoying life, but to where you're not working yourself to death. So that felt like an interesting thing because I grew up in a situation where we grew up on a farm where, the mentality there is just work, right? It's like, how do you be successful? You be successful by just working, not just work harder, work all the hours. And that's how you do it. And to read that book and was like, well, there is a different way. That's not the only way. You don't have to just work yourself to death.
So that book helped you find the balance between working and then also enjoying life.
Yeah, exactly. I felt that book like kind of gave a breath of fresh air of like, okay, there's another way to think about this. It doesn't have to just be, put in 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and that's how you're going to get it done. It's like, no, there's other ways to do it. And so that was the first thing that really opened my eyes, I felt like, to that.
So, as an entrepreneur, how have you grown, and what are some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned along the way?
Let's see. How have I grown? I think you end up really understanding your own weaknesses more over time. I feel like in the beginning, the nature of being an entrepreneur, it's just whatever. I can figure it all out. I can do anything. You kind of by default, that has to be, whether you feel that way or not in the beginning, that ends up being the reality is like you have to figure a lot of things out. And I would say over time, what I've done a better job at is just realizing that like, this is simply not my specialty. And I definitely need to find somebody in this area of the business, in this area, and to really help me. I got to find really, if I can find really quality people to help me with these couple things, I can do the rest. As opposed to like, I just need to do it all. I can figure out everything. Really understanding what your weaknesses are and being able to hire those people that can fill the gap. Yeah, I'd say one of the most valuable lessons that I could pass on to any entrepreneur, which to me it's a little baffling. I feel like a lot of people don't quite get this, is hire people that are better than you. Don't be intimidated by the idea that like you somehow should be the smartest, best, most talented person in the world, and you just need to hire these people to somebody that can help you accomplish tasks, and you'll take care of everything else. If you purposefully try to hire people that are better than you, you're life will be so much better. Not only will your business be better, but your life will be so much better because all the stress won't come on you. All of a sudden you have these people that like, hey, you know what? They're better at it than I am. Thankfully I own the business, and thankfully, I can kind of point them in directions, but they have more talent in this area than I do. So I'll just let them deal with it. It doesn't need to be a weight that I have to take on my shoulders. They're better at it. I'll trust them to do it.
So what skills do you believe are essential for running a successful business?
I think number one, you have to have the ability to deal with a lot of ups and downs. I think for sure that running a business can mentally, it's definitely not for everybody. If you don't have that ability to just turn it off, no matter what, no matter how good, bad, if things are going terrible, you need to just still have that ability to put it to the side and just enjoy your life, and not let it completely run your life. And so I would say that that's one thing as far as what I think that, can everybody be an entrepreneur? I, I would say that in some ways, yeah. In some ways, it's just you don't realize what you're capable of until you just get thrown into the middle of it and you have to figure it out. But in other ways, I think where the people that can't, there are more people that can't do it than I had realized before. And I think it's that idea of because the mental pressure. I think there's a lot of people that the mental pressure would just be too much, and they can't just turn it off and just be okay. They're always going to be worried about, because there's always a problem going on. There's never a day where there aren't some fairly major problems that are happening.
How do you make sure that it doesn't control your life, the stress? I mean, it doesn't get to you all the time.
For me, it's been having those kind of different things in life where I can get away. For me, it's like exercising and different things like that. To me, I like to cycle. Just some of those activities that I really enjoy, that no matter what's going on in life, I can do that. I can put on some headphones and hop on my bike and go pedal up and down the coast and just forget about everything for a while, and allow that kind of reset and come back and be able to then, a couple hours later, come back and like feel a little refreshed.
I think that's a good place to end this. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Let's see. My younger self, one piece of advice. Um, hmm. I think the idea of, really, I feel like a lot of times the trick is the idea of, as an entrepreneur, you naturally have that thing of looking for that niche that the market, needs, and figuring out a way to make money in that. Just, random, nobody's filling this space, right? There's money that can be made in this space. How do I fill, I can see that there's profit to be made. I can see there's a business to be made there. And it's balancing that with, yeah, but what are your real passions? In trying to figure out how do you find that balance, because it's not easy to find those niches where there's money available. And so a lot of times it's that idea of, well, I don't even care about this industry, but I can see there's a lot of potential for income there, so I should focus on it. And that balance of like, oh, I love doing this thing so much, I'm just going to focus all my efforts in this thing where there is no money to be made, right? And it's that idea of, yeah, spending the time to think about that balance and whatever you're going to approach.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I've really learned a lot and enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you too.